All right, welcome everybody to Yeti's Office Hours webinar on taking your product idea to the next level. My name is John Emmenizer. I'm the marketing manager here at Yeti. And today I'm joined by Tim Shipman. He's the strategy director at Yeti. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to dive into how people create ideas and ultimately how to start talking about them more.
Likewise, awesome. So jumping right in here, the high-level agenda for the webinar. First, we're going to start where all great products start, with the idea. And then from there, we'll look at establishing a problem statement, defining a target audience, and then understanding the context for all of this. So Tim, before we kind of dive into the details here and get going with the slides, somebody has a product idea, they're attending the webinar. What would you say is kind of our purpose for this webinar, what you would hope that they would take away from this, and kind of what the end goal is?
Sure. I mean, really what I want to be able to do is kind of educate people on the existing way we create ideas, and then ultimately give them a framework to reevaluate how we think ideas, and then really be able to talk about them more. We often find ourselves in this position where we want to give a solution right out of the gate, and that's very limiting. So I want to kind of give everyone the tools to revert back to the problem statement.
Gotcha. I think that ties really nicely into our first slide here. So someone has a new product idea. What is their first step? Where do they start?
How we all start is very basically we see a problem. We either see it happen to ourselves or we see it happen to somebody around us, be it a stranger or a friend or something. But we identify that there is a problem out there that can be improved. From there, we take it and we internalize it.
Gotcha. Okay, so somebody has this idea, they kind of see a problem in the world that either they're experiencing and or people they know are experiencing. They're like, hey, this could be improved. Where do they go from there?
Yeah, we naturally start to internalize it, and this internalization process takes anywhere from a few hours to a few days to weeks, months, years, even. But ultimately, what we're doing is we're taking in this problem, we're starting to create a solution inside of our own heads. Really, this is answering our own expectations of what we would need to see out of a solution, and in doing so, we start to create a general flow of it. What are the steps I'm going to need to take in this solution to solve the problem? And that's really the initial days of internalization.
Gotcha. So when you're talking there, Tim, about creating that general flow, how much of that is looking at kind of the existing user experience, the existing flow, if you will, and how much of it is you have this new idea for a new flow and kind of like mapping the two together? Like what's the balance there, or what's really your focus kind of in making that statement?
It varies. Seasoned entrepreneurs and seasoned VCs will look at a problem, and the first thing they'll try to do is map it to an existing solution.
Sure.
But more often than not, and often what I say is the greatest lie ever told in Silicon Valley is that there is nothing doing this right now. Is that I cannot find anything that is currently doing what I'm talking about. And we have to kind of get past that and identify there are solutions out there. They might be harder to find. They might be a little bit more disjointed than a straight line of technology is normally, but it really depends on who you're talking to.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So what's next? Where would somebody go from there?
Sure. So the next kind of phase we have after we've seen the problem, internalize it, we create a solution, we create a general flow. Ultimately, we're not that comfortable with it, so we start to tweak it, review it, improve it, grow it, because we'll actually hit this point in ourselves where we're like, hey, is the market big enough? And if not, we'll grow the market a little bit. We'll modify that problem, and we'll try to grow it a little bit, or we'll add features in of the common tools that are out there. The greatest thing I've seen as far as adding inside somebody's own head is when they identify a flaw inside a social network.
Okay.
And then they grab all of the tools from all social networks and they kind of pull that in to justify their new social network. It matches everything, plus it solves this problem. And that's really kind of still going on inside of our own heads.
Cool. So somebody has this idea, they see a problem in the world. They're internalizing that problem, kind of thinking it through internally. What might a solution be? What might that flow be? And then they start kind of tweaking, reviewing, improving, kind of by themselves. What is their step? What is that next step to like gather feedback? What can they do in terms of getting early feedback?
Typically, what's done is we start to socially test it, and how that's done is we take it to our friends and family, because those are the people that are around us. Those are the people we have easy access to. Those are the people we trust, and ultimately, those are the people that we know won't take our ideas and run.
Hopefully, right?
Yeah. And that's part of the problem, right? Is the fact that we're presenting a solution statement. We're kind of bound to this one audience of friends and family who we have this personal relationship with, who want to be incredibly helpful to us, and we're giving them a solution. Now, because they have all this, bias and personal relationship stuff, they're going to sit there and they're going to try to figure out what the problem we're trying to solve is. And that naturally leads to an assumption being made of what the original problem is, that problem statement. And once they've made that assumption and start to give us feedback, we actually lose control of the feedback and the quality of it. All of a sudden, we could be getting feedback on an entirely separate problem statement rather than the problem we were trying to solve, because our assumption or our solution statement wasn't as clear as it needed to be.
So it seems like it's really critical when you're getting that early feedback to not put the cart before the horse and make sure you're like getting feedback on the actual problem statement rather than giving people a solution statement and leaving it up to their own perceptions and interpretation of what they think you think the problem statement is.
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
Absolutely. And we'll get further into that later.
Gotcha. So as I kind of alluded to, like what is a way to mitigate that? Because you have this early audience that might be a little bit biased or very biased, or they don't want to be honest because they're so close with you. Is there a way to fix that, or?
There is. And that's going into giving them the keys to the kingdom. It's taking it back and saying, let's just actually give them the problem statement. We can make it a much more binary statement of, do you experience this problem, yes or no, versus would you use this solution? And then they have to do all of this mental rundown of, okay, what's the problem they're experiencing? Do I have that problem? Okay, is the problem great enough where I would use this solution that would work as X, Y, and Z? Plus, I should probably do this because they didn't address this, and that's part of my problem with this problem. And all of a sudden, we have like this growing
spiderweb
logic tree, and it's getting more and more complex. And our feedback isn't as focused or direct as we really need it to be at this stage.
Gotcha. Okay, so moving to our next section here, someone's ready to start establishing a clear problem statement. Tim, talk to us a little bit. I mean, you already have, but maybe elaborate a bit on how important it is to establish your problem statement. And what are kind of the first things that someone can do to attain clarity on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is rolling it all the way back, as I said. It's going back to the first thing you saw. And what we need to do is we need to start at a baseline of, like, as a general problem, do other people experience this? And so we need to be very clear about it. In the later example, we'll see that I use for Uber. It's rolling it back and just looking at, hey, is getting a cab a problem, yes or no? Everybody can answer that. I haven't given anybody a solution. I've given no IP up. All I've done is start to validate, is this a problem?
Gotcha. So someone's continuing to work to like attain and improve the clarity of their problem statement. What are the questions they can ask? Where would you advise that they go from there, essentially?
Yeah, from here you need to start refining it. So we start with something incredibly basic. We start with, can you get a cab, yes or no? And as we get a lot of yeses, we know we need to modify the statement. If we get a lot of no's, we need to modify the statement. And one will lead us to kind of thin the statement out and try to roll it back to get more kind of positive. The other one is, let's get more specific. Let's see if we can refine this problem statement a little bit more. Meanwhile, we're getting more specific for ourselves and our solution, but we're not sharing it. We're simply sharing a more advanced problem statement. And in the case of Uber, it's saying something like, I can never get a cab in San Francisco between the hours of X and Y, and the driver never shows up. Is that something you experience? And we can start to look at that binary yes or no thing, and we can start to say, okay, like, these are the important factors. Anybody listening in can probably pick out, like, okay, well, he just touched on the fact that, like, he wants to send a car, he wants a driver associated with it, and he wants, it to be a relatively, like, time-gated thing.
Sure.
But I haven't bothered to, like, try to explain this big, complex solution. I've merely just established that that's a problem.
Gotcha. So in all the many, many conversations you're having every day about new product ideas that people are pitching to you and to Yeti, is it more common, would you say, just from your experience, where people need to, as they're like modifying and adjusting their problem statement, they need to like tighten it up more and add more qualifiers, or are they like too narrow and need to broaden? What's like more common?
I think the most common isn't actually getting a problem statement.
Gotcha.
I spend a lot of my day making those assumptions.
Yeah.
And I've developed a whole series of questions to try to get back to those.
Yeah.
It's like, what is the actual problem here?
Yeah. It's like they're trying to build that building without the foundation. Of the clear problem.
Diving straight into the solution is definitely something that is a bit tricky. Just because there's a whole lot of work that went into that prior to. There's a lot of it's based off assumptions and not real grounded feedback.
Gotcha. Cool. Makes sense. So what's the importance of kind of auditing the competitive landscape and looking at current solutions? I know you touched on this a bit earlier, but what would you elaborate on there?
Yeah. I mean, kind of the greatest lie ever told in Silicon Valley is that there's no competitor there.
Right.
That nobody's doing this and it's completely unique and new.
Yeah.
But the reality is there is a solution to every problem out there. It might not be an ideal solution.
Sure.
And as time has passed, it might be less and less of a legitimate solution. But there was a way that we were able to kind of get around these.
Gotcha.
If we just talk about like one category that I love, it's called the mommy app category, right? The solution wasn't as obvious as some people would have liked, but a company like Rinse was able to come out of it. And Rinse is considered a mommy app because who used to do your laundry? Your mother.
Right.
Uber's a mommy app because like who used to drive you around town? Your mother.
Yeah, totally.
That recurring market. Who used to make you dinner?
Yeah.
Your mother. Well, Sprague, Munchery, all of those guys sit in the mommy apps because we don't want to do it ourselves. We can pay $10 and somebody shows up.
Exactly.
But the reality is that the current solution that exists before those was actually just going to the grocery store and buying groceries myself, or it was doing a grocery delivery service that would bring me the groceries. Now it's they get to look at each other and say, okay, well, like the competitor to Sprig is Munchery and Caviar and all these other ones, but ultimately their original competitor was just me standing up and going to the market and then coming home and making food.
Gotcha. So back to our example with Uber, how would Uber tie into what you just mentioned?
Yeah, so kind of taking you through the flow of it and hitting on the importance of each phase is, through the problem statement, we're able to say like, hey, I can never get a cab when I want one. That's the crucial qualifier.
Right.
But it establishes a baseline of like, what does the product absolutely have to be? On a binary level, I need this to function as this, and the answer is yes or no, did it. Then we can start to look at the size of it, and we can say, okay, is this unique to San Francisco, or is this unique to New York or Chicago? And really, what on a early day level, they were able to say, well, all major metropolitan markets have this. And when they looked at the current competitive landscape, it was pretty much just cab companies that they had to really look at. Now, the importance of that is when they go into their problem statement, they need to address where the failures of the cab company is. And that's why you have that really important statement, when I want one.
Gotcha.
You could always get a car. It just might take you 45 minutes to an hour. but the crucial part was I can never get a cab when I want one.
Gotcha.
And only through understanding the current solution were we able to add that qualifier in there and test that problem statement.
Gotcha. Tim, I loved earlier we were chatting. I love the example you gave me of HipChat and Slack and how that competitive audit, if you will, really made a big difference in Slack's present and future. Do you want to comment on that just for the audience's benefit?
Yeah. So this is one of my favorite stories in Silicon Valley over the last couple of years.
Mine as well. Yeah.
Atlassian was doing a kind of internal chat software called HipChat, and it was doing very well. But it was ultimately this massive piece of software that they had kind of developed a bit in a silo, but generally they had really good feedback boards where people were recommending all these great features and to make the product better and improve it. And what Slack did is this nice little startup about 2 years ago is look at this feedback board, grab the top couple of most reported items and said, we could spin out a product pretty quickly that addresses only these.
Right.
And within the span of 2 years, we've seen Slack surpass HipChat in user audience, but they were able to do it by very clearly focusing in on, what was my competition doing wrong? And how do I make my product better or good enough that would cause an audience to shift from the current solution to a new solution?
Yeah, that really seems like one of the best possible examples of what we're talking about. Just they literally went to their competitors' complaints and built their product around that. I love that example. Okay, so next we're going to talk about in this section defining your target audience. Talk to us a little bit, Tim, about just the importance of that and how that kind of relates back to the stuff we just talked about.
Definitely. So there's roughly two audiences we really need to address this early in product development and developing a problem statement. And the first one is our target audience. This is, who we want to use the product. This is, when Slack went to HipChat's feedback board, they were looking at a very specific set of feedback from the development community here in San Francisco and Silicon Valley and saying, okay, what do these guys need? And that was really their target audience. Now, the early adopters that they got kind of ranged the gambit.
Sure.
And it's an entirely separate audience that doesn't really get represented very well by anybody because it's comprised of everybody. This can be 40-year-old men, it can be 80-year-old women that just love technology. It can be a 14-year-old kid that doesn't have the financial freedom to pay for a service, but certainly will adopt it in its early days and it's free and give you great feedback.
How much, I would imagine it would vary quite a bit depending on the product and the industry, et cetera, but how much overlap is there typically between, target audience and early adopter? Is that tough to say?
It's very tough to say.
Yeah.
You just don't know who your early adopter market is. And so what I always recommend is putting and implementing a lot of tools very early on to track that community, that early adopter community, and start the conversation. Okay. Because a percentage of them will be what you want your target audience to be, and you'll need to prioritize their feedback over it, so you can bridge that gap from early adopter to your target audience. And there's a whole book written about it called Bridging the Chasm. It's a great read, and I recommend everyone reads it if they're building a product.
Cool.
But we have to find them and get their feedback early and often. But then we also need to get the feedback of everybody else, because ultimately those other groups are represented on the other side of that chasm as well. And maybe they're not our target audience, but they are adopters that can come over to our side.
Awesome. That's a great distinction. It seems like it really is an important and at times a very delicate balance between those two audience groups. It's like you want to keep your early adopters happy without compromising your long-term future and the mass adoption of your target audience.
Definitely. And one of the pitfalls I've kind of seen in just looking at the early adopter market is because it is so ranged in demographic.
Right.
It's very easy to get caught into, this market's now adopted it. We need to kind of build for them as well. And rather than prioritizing, I've seen entrepreneurs caught in a situation where they're building for everyone, everywhere, anytime, and any possible use case. And the valley is littered with startups that weren't able to focus down and say, this is what I'm starting with. we really need that kind of like laser focus of this is where I want to go. And that's why it's so important to sit down and say, like, this is who the target audience is going to be for this, because I validated it on a problem statement.
Gotcha. So back to Uber.
Yes.
How does Uber relate back to all this?
Going back to my example, their target audience is really anybody that uses a smartphone that also would use cabs as transport.
Yeah,
that's really their target audience. They're not looking to convince somebody to buy a smartphone. They're not looking to convince anybody that they need to like run and upgrade from their flip phone. What they are saying is like, look, if you have a smartphone and you could use cabs as transport, we probably want you as an audience, as a target audience member. Now, what they kind of got as early adopters was the oldest generation of millennials in San Francisco, and that was very intelligent of them.
Yeah,
they went after people with a disposable income. It's no secret that San Francisco, like developers and the tech community, has kind of excess cash to burn, and so it was a great audience to target because it wasn't this massive market. It was like people that would just start coming into the general cab market and focusing on them and said, hey, let's give you guys a great experience. From there, they were able to learn a ton of lessons of how to apply it beyond the black car and into regular cabs, into SUV, like much nicer SUVs, kind of across the market.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Okay, so next section, understand the context for all this, kind of how the various pieces map back to each other and interrelate. So Tim, talk to us a little bit about that. How do you align your user with your problem statement and kind of fit these pieces together?
I mean, going back to the importance of context is we need to always respect what the user is doing because we just can't control it.
Right.
We know that they're out there experiencing this problem because we validated it. Because we validated it, right? We went out, we asked a bunch of people, do you have this problem? We refined that problem statement. We then, talked to them and made sure we established our audience. But now we need to understand contextually what they're doing. Because we certainly don't want to serve them stuff that they wouldn't want. Because that's not solving their problem, that's making it worse.
Sure.
And so when we take a look at, what is the user seeing, doing, feeling, thinking, saying, we need to really respect, like, okay, when we come up and we offer you like a solution to your problem, we need to know what do you need. You need a car to show up. In the Uber example, you want a bit of transparency into the transaction. You want to see that somebody is kind of tied to your car and that you guys are somehow connected. And then you would expect that you can finish the transaction through this because you were able to initiate it. And when we break that down, the first thing we're gonna build is the need. You need that car to show up, so you need the system that can call a driver and say, hey, show up.
Gotcha. It seems like it's really important to like prioritize the need to have over the nice to have,
Absolutely.
Especially in the early stages of building something.
And that's where we can really utilize context. It's the great equalizer of all functionality is understanding the context, because if it's not a need to have, we have a job to put it below the rest of the needs.
Gotcha.
If you're not able to accomplish what the solution promises, there's no point to it.
Gotcha. That's a great insight, and I think a really good distinction. So what does somebody need to look at for this?
You need to understand what your user is going to go through from an end-to-end experience. And this includes triggers outside of your app. This includes, they've woken up and they're kind of going through their day. And to continue my Uber example, Uber has a fantastic trigger that they have zero control over, and that's the weather.
Right.
As soon as it starts raining, every person in that city starts to think about pulling out their smartphone, calling an Uber, because they don't want to go stomping through the rain.
Right.
And that is an external trigger that they have no control over. Now, they do have other triggers, and many companies have used these in different ways. But we have triggers inside of apps that are set by users. We have triggers that are set by the company, and so those fall into like the push notifications. Certainly, freemium gaming has seen massive amounts of success inside of those, because what they'll end up doing is noticing like a dip off trend, and they'll give you a push notification of, hey, here you have like, free money to kind of start playing the game again. They pull you right back in.
Sure.
But what we need to do again is apply context to when these triggers happen.
Okay.
And so Uber knows to try to tell their staff to staff up when it's going to rain. They give drivers heads up like, hey, we know there's a storm coming.
Got it.
You probably want to be working because there's probably going to be a surge charge because there's probably going to be a really high demand.
Gotcha.
And it's their understanding of that trigger that allows them to be ready for it.
So would you advocate like that people would kind of create an exhaustive list of potential triggers, both like in their control and out of their control, and use that as like a basis for moving forward? Like, what would you advise?
I would recommend, before building triggers into your app, really doing a deep dive into why they should be there.
Okay.
Because there really needs to be a good point. Because one of the fastest ways to get deleted off a user's device is to send inappropriate triggers. We don't have control over their state of mind. And when we as a company send a trigger, like a push notification, we are essentially sending just a shot in the dark. And we don't know if they're in a good mood, bad mood.
It's risky because you don't know the context they're in that given moment. Most of the time.
The internet's littered with semi-humorous stories where Travelocity has accidentally sent, a vacation push notification like, hey, like, cheap flights to Hawaii, and like the dude's holding it up his cell phone next to his burning down house. Like, obviously he's now associated a very negative thing with that brand,
because they didn't have respect for context, right?
Well, they didn't know. They would never know.
They were ignorant of context. Gotcha.
We do need to be careful when we build in these triggers. We need to be careful not to bug users. Certainly everybody out there has an experience where they've downloaded a game and it just keeps hitting you with push notification, push notification. And you're like, I didn't like that game that much. And off it goes.
I think you're spot on. That's one of the quickest ways, I think, to get deleted from somebody's phone. Okay, so what's next?
I mean, I touched on this a bit before, but we can use context to prioritize. When we're looking at where the user is in the process, we can really prioritize what functionality needs to get built. If we really nail down getting cars to people, we can start to fill out the wants and the expectations of the user. We can start to build out those features because we know our needs are stable. And because we started with that problem statement, and we started with what the problem was, and we got that confirmed, we have a very clear understanding of what our needs, wants, and expectations are. And it naturally just prioritizes them into when we're building the product, we know where to start. Gotcha.
Yeah, that reminds me back to the analogy you're always using with the building and the foundation. It's like if you have that solid foundation of the clear, concise problem statement, you're safe to build layers on. But without that, you're just kind of building clutter and noise. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so putting it all together, how can the audience put this all together, Tim, and kind of just walk us through that?
So everyone in the audience will now have a bit of fun homework, but this is kind of what I do on a daily basis. But it's, you need to be willing to challenge your own thought process. You need to be able to say like, look, am I just trying to provide a solution, or am I trying to analyze a problem statement? And that's really the foundation of all of this conversation, is making sure we get back to a problem statement so we can talk about it freely. It's far easier for me to walk down the street and ask random strangers about a problem than it is for me to put out a solution. From there, we can start to define and redefine our problem statement. We can work on it. We can modify it. We can change it based on the feedback we're getting. And the best part of it is it's free, because I haven't tried to build a solution yet.
That is the best part.
I can start to validate my idea for free, and I can start to do the footwork and the data behind it that ultimately angels and VCs and other development companies will want to see to validate the market. From there, we have kind of an established market. Tracking that data allows us to say like, okay, I talked to this person, I gave them this problem statement, here's the feedback I got.
Mm-hmm.
And we're able to say like, okay, this matches up with this target demographic. This is the audience. This is the audience that responds very positively to this solution. This is the one. These are the people I'm building for first. That doesn't mean you're not going to build for more audiences in the future. It just means who you're going to build for first, because that's your strongest market. That's the people that are most likely to experience it and most likely to try to solve it.
Gotcha.
From there, we can kind of align that problem with the market, and it's a very easy step to do. Like all this homework is designed to be feeding into the next, so you can't like skip one and not come back.
Right.
So we'll need to make sure we can align it.
Yeah.
And that should be a fairly easy process if we started with the appropriate steps. And then from there, we can build a very clear statement that addresses both our problem and our market. Mm-hmm. And that becomes what effectively can be a 10 to 30-second commercial where we're able to say, hey, this is what I'm working on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's given in the form of a question and a problem statement with a market in mind. And we haven't given away any of our solution yet.
Gotcha. Perfect. Awesome. So, Tim, we have a few questions that our audience has sent in, and thanks to everyone who did send in questions. The first question, I think we have time for 3 or 4 of these. The first one, at what point does it make sense to stop asking questions about the problem statement and start actually investing in developing the solution? And so I think that's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Really, it's going to vary from idea to idea, and the larger or more complex it is, the more I think I'd want to see. Mm-hmm. But this is ultimately a bit of a personal thing, mm-hmm. and something that you'll need to work with other entrepreneurs on is deciding, what is your tipping point. Mm-hmm. I would say the very minimal thing, I'd like to see probably a few hundred conversations that have gone the way I would really want them to go before I would start investing.
Gotcha.
Or I would start shopping it around and pitching it to some of the angels that exist in the area, mm-hmm. and start getting feedback from them.
Cool. Okay, so next question I have here. Someone asked, when should I seek an investment and how much should I seek?
Yes. So it's right after the research. So it's after you're able to kind of get your free research, uh-huh. and you kind of get through all that homework. That's when you want to start picking up the phone. You'll obviously want to build out your business plan. You'll want to start doing the groundwork on that of what they would really expect. Mm-hmm. And then you want to pick up the phone and start calling them. Not just for the fact that they can give you money, mm-hmm. But because they can give you advice and feedback on the markets you're talking about. Mm-hmm. They can make you aware of other plays that are going on. Some of the competitors that are in stealth mode.
Sure.
I hate that term, but it's true.
Yeah, totally. No, that can definitely be valuable, I think. Okay, so I think we have time for 2 more questions. Let me look through these. Okay, so somebody asked, how do I know if a problem is actually worth solving? I like that one.
Yeah. Your target audience will tell you, because you are going to ask a lot of people, and this is why I said a few hundred.
Yeah.
If you are really struggling to get people to commit that this is actually a problem they experience, you kind of have to be your own policeman on it and decide what, maybe I'm the oddity that thinks this is a real problem, but it's not. And you have to be willing to say no to yourself. Any good entrepreneur, any good VC out there will tell you that you're not failing. You're learning that that's not a market.
Right. Okay, cool. So last question, Tim. Okay, so somebody asked, who is my target audience if everyone could benefit from using my product?
That's
a tough one.
That is very tough.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you'll need to pick somebody.
Mm-hmm.
You just kind of need to figure out, who the strongest market is, mm-hmm. who the people are that most identify with the problem. And if you have a lot of people identifying with it, mm-hmm. What you can do is start to think about what's the simplest solution that would start to fulfill a segment of this market.
Mm-hmm.
And what that will allow you to do is build the product faster, get it out to a target audience, and leverage that momentum to go back and kind of build in the complexities that pick up the other markets. And that's not always the easiest thing to do. It's sometimes very difficult, but it gets, like I said, it gets a lot easier though if you've done the homework of developing a problem statement and testing iterations of it and continuing to develop it. Because what you'll be able to do is just kind of keep climbing up that tree and say, okay, here's where I had this market, and this is a fairly easy solution.
Gotcha. That's a great answer. Well, thanks, Tim. I think there were a lot of awesome insights in today's webinar. Hope the audience really benefited from it, but thanks for your time and your insights.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. And thank you to the audience for joining today. Feel free to get in touch with Yeti. We'd love to have a conversation with you about any new product ideas you might have. And also check us out online at yeti.co, which is our website, and follow us on social media. Thanks, everybody.